A figure so beastly some say it's half man, half wolf. A rural town caught in the grip of midnight terror, and one man, Keith Williams, who claims his run-in with a horrifying creature redefined everything that he believed about the world. Now, could a werewolf really be haunting London, Ohio? Or is it all just a story run wild? For years, the quiet fields of Madison County have fostered whispers. Rumors of strange footprints found by farmhouses, unsettling howls drifting across the moonlit skies. And most folks shrug it off. I mean, after all, werewolves belong in old monster movies. But then Keith Williams began telling a story. A story so haunting it rattled even the biggest of skeptics. I mean, according to Keith, something prowled the outskirts of London late one October evening. Something he swears was no ordinary animal. Standing on two legs, with a hawking frame and eyes that glowed in the dark. It reminded him of every werewolf legend that he heard as a child. But this wasn't fiction. This was real. Welcome to Retraced Echoes, where we sift through the mysteries that gnaw on the edge of reality. I'm Bert, and tonight, we're going to unravel the legend of the London, Ohio werewolf. A tale that could possibly change everything that we think we know about myth and everything that we think we know about monsters. Is London, Ohio just another small town trading in a tall tale? Or is something dark and primal truly stalking its fields? In this episode, we're breaking down every chilling detail. Keith's alleged face-to-face encounter, the eerie sightings that followed, and how one local legend spiraled into a phenomena. So keep your lights low, your curiosity high, because if there's any truth to these howls, we're dealing with a nightmare too close for comfort. Was Keith Williams the only one to see the creature? Or did something even stranger unfold in the weeks that followed? Eyewitnesses, unexplainable tracks, legend reborn. It's time to retrace the footsteps leading to that fateful night and to see if we can separate beast from myth and rumor from reality. Let's retrace the echoes, if you dare. It started out like any dream come true. Rolling farmland, open skies, and a cozy home sitting just on the edge of the woods. A perfect spot for Keith and Diane Williams to raise their 4-year-old daughter, Raven. A quiet, peaceful life. Or so they thought. Now, Keith worked nights. He was taking welding classes to build a better future. That left Diane home alone with Raven most evenings. Not that she minded. I mean, this was a safe place. A good place. Until one night, it wasn't. At first, it was just a little noise. Quick little scampering just on the outside of the window. Probably just a raccoon or a stray dog looking for food. Diane barely even noticed. But then it happened again. And when she passed by the window, she froze. Two glowing eyes, staring at her from the darkness, locked onto her unblinking. Diane's mind erased. Was it a dog? Was it a deer? No. These eyes, they weren't low to the ground. If anything, they were level with hers. Something wasn't right. She would move to another window, and she would pull the curtains open, only to see those same eyes moving with her, darting for another vantage point, never breaking their stare. Now, panic would set in. Diane rushed from window to window, slamming them shut, drawing the blinds, trying to block out whatever was lurking in the dark. Now, for Diane, this probably felt like an eternity, but Keith finally returned home and he found Diane shaken. She was breathless, struggling to explain what had just happened. Now, he would try to reassure her, but when he heard about those eyes, the way the creature would stalk from window to window, he knew one thing for sure. He had to find out what was stalking his home. Now, Keith had hunted these woods his entire life. He knew how to track animals, and he knew that if something had been out there, he would find the proof. But here's the thing. He didn't. He didn't find any proof. There was no footprints, no trampled grass, no broken branches. It was almost as though nothing had been there at all. Keith tried to explain it away. Maybe it was just a reflection, an animal perched on a fence, but Diane knew. She knew what she saw, and deep down, Keith could tell. This was something that she was not imagining. Now, with a little bit of time going by, things would almost feel normal again. But Diane, she could never shake the feeling, the kind that lingers in your bones, telling you that something's not over. Because this was only the beginning. Now, after a little bit of time, things kind of went back to normal. You see, after that terrifying night, those eyes that was in the window, Diane tried to convince herself that maybe, just maybe, Keith was right. Maybe it was a one-time thing, a strange trick of the light. Maybe she was just tired and exhausted for the evening. Maybe it was a passing animal, something that she would never see again. In fact, a full month passed, not a single noise outside. Not a single shadow moving in the trees. Diane focused on the routine, taking care of Raven, keeping the house in order, pushing the memory of that night further and further in the past. And then, what happened again? One night while cleaning up, Diane happened to glance towards the window, and that's when she would see them yet again. 2 glowing eyes, and they were right at eye level. Now her heart started pounding. This wasn't headlights bouncing off of deer eyes. It wasn't a stray dog. This was someone who was watching. They were watching again. Now Diane's instincts, they kicked in. She would step back, hoping to, if anything, slip out of view, to put anything in front of her and those sets of eyes. But the second she moved, so did they. Now she would hurry into the front room only to see it again. Those same 2 eyes in another window, same height, and the same eyes that she had just seen. It was almost like it was following her. Now Diane did the only thing that she could think to do. She would kill all the lights in the house. Now the house was bathed only in the moonlight as she crept silently from window to window, just searching. For a second, she thought maybe it was gone. Maybe she had just panicked. And then she saw it. Pressed against her living room window, so close, she could make out the silhouette of it all. A tall, human-like figure. This time, she didn't hesitate. She would grab the phone and dial 911 and report an intruder. Now, police assured her that they were on their way. But as soon as she hung up, she could hear it moving. It wasn't running. It wasn't stumbling. It was walking very deliberately, like it was scanning her house. Lucky for Diane, the red and blue lights, they began to fill the darkness, and patrol cars started to pull in. Diane could finally relax and breathe a little bit. Officers would step out with flashlights in hand, scouring every single inch of their yard, but just like before, they found absolutely nothing. No footprints, no disturbed grass, no sign that anyone or anything had been there at all. And that's when Keith would arrive. He would find Diane yet again shaking, and police officers that were looking extremely skeptical. I mean, from the officer's point of view, Diane was just rattled, maybe a little spooked by the quietness of country life, and even Keith had his own doubts. He didn't want to admit it, but a part of him wanted to believe that the officers were right, that this was all just Diane's nerves. But Diane, she knew better, and the question that loomed over both of them was if, possibly, there was something that was watching. And the next question is, why? And whatever was out there, it wasn't finished yet. Now let's fast forward to a crisp morning just after Thanksgiving in 1981. The snow blanketed the ground, fresh and untouched. almost like a clean slate waiting for the day to begin. Now Keith, he woke up early, just before the sun as well as just before his family, and he wanted to surprise them to some fresh donuts for breakfast. He would end up leaving the house, and he would walk to his garage. He would open the door. As he got into the car, he would put his flashlight in the passenger seat. And from the very moment that the car started, and the headlights started to cut through the darkness, Keith saw something in his rearview mirror. He thought to himself, maybe it was a shadow. I mean, it was just a flicker of movement. But he felt like something wasn't right. He wasn't sure what he saw. Now, most people would have just drove away. Shake it off as just a trick of the early morning fog, but Keith, he was not most people. He would then turn the car back off. He would grab his flashlight, stepped out, and he turned towards the back of his house. Now, as Keith would shine the flashlight towards his house, there would be nobody there. But as he would shine him down onto the ground would tell a very different story. See, there was footprints, and large ones at that, leading straight up to his house and then disappearing on top of the roof. Now, Keith, his stomach tightened up. There was no tracks leading away from his house, no trail vanishing into the woods. There was just footprints walking up to the side of his house, almost like whoever made them just climbed straight up the side. Now, Keith didn't waste any time. He would run back inside, grab his rifle, and call his best friend Dennis. He didn't know what was out there, and whatever it was, he was not going to face it alone. Now, Dennis pulled in just a few minutes later, and he would find Keith on the very edge. At first, he just kind of laughed it off. I mean, Keith had always been the more high-strung of the two. But when Keith would point up to that roof and he would see those, I guess you could say, footprints, Dennis stopped laughing. See, whatever this was, it was not normal. These were not normal tracks that you would see when you were out hunting. This was something different. They followed the prints looking for some sort of an explanation. Maybe it was a prank, maybe it was a hoax. But then they found the spot where whatever this was landed, and it was a solid 20 feet away, almost like whatever had been up there had just jumped from the house. Now let me tell you, if a person had made that jump, they would have broken their legs, or perhaps worse. But whatever landed there, they walked away without even so much as even a stumble. The prints were huge. We're talking about 14 inches long, and they were clawed. And more importantly, they were fully upright. No sign of dragging, no transition to all fours. This wasn't an animal scrambling up a house. This was something that was walking. Now, Keith's instincts, they screamed danger. But instincts, they didn't matter now. Proof did. Rifle in hand, he wasn't going to let whatever this was just slip away again. He was going to find it. Now, for 2 miles, they followed the tracks, through the trees, deeper into the woods. Each step could be their last, if whatever it was still nearby. And then the trees thinned. The footprints ended. And standing in the clearing ahead was an old isolated cabin. Now the prints, they didn't run. They didn't lead away. They climbed onto the porch steps, leading straight into the door. But see, here's the thing, folks. You see, animals don't open doors. This couldn't have been a stray dog. Was this where the creature lived? Was it a drifter, a cryptid, or perhaps something far worse? Dennis, always the hothead, started pounding on the wooden wall, shouting and demanding for answers, but Keith kind of came to a realization. You see, they were both armed, standing on someone else's property with no idea who or perhaps what was inside. Keith would make the call. They had to go, and they had to go right now. They would hike back to the road, and they would call Keith's dad, who would pick them up. As they rode home, Keith recounted every chilling detail until his dad cut him off with something even stranger. See, the man who owned that cabin? He wasn't a stranger at all. Keith's father knew him. He was a local guy who worked over the town's tire shop, and he mostly kept to himself. I mean, he had lived there for years, but here's the thing. No one ever said that he was home that morning. No one has seen him, in fact, that entire day, and no one could explain how those tracks stretching for miles through the snow led directly to his door. A week passed, and the week was extremely quiet. There was no more footprints in the snow, no strange noises outside, and life for Keith Williams had kind of settled, at least on the surface. But mysteries, they always have a way of circling back just when you think that they're over. That morning started like any other morning. Now, some would say coincidentally, Dennis, he needed to have a tire patch, so he and Keith, they made the short drive to the local tire shop. Just a quick errand. Nothing unusual. Nothing at all to worry about. But the moment that they stepped inside, the air shifted. The shop manager took one look at that tire and he started yelling, "George! George, get over here!" And then from the dim corner of the shop, a man stepped forward. He was tall, lanky. He was easily 6'5", and he moved with a very unsettling confidence, almost like he wasn't in a rush, but still completely in control. And that's when Keith knew this was him, the man from the cabin, the place where the tracks had led, and only led they had. And now, he was standing right in front of them, and he was just staring at them. George locked eyes, and he had a very sharp gaze, almost like they were too sharp. Keith later described it as almost unnatural, like a static charge was building in the air between the two of them, and in that instance he knew that George recognized both of them. He knew who they were. He knew where they had been. Without so much as even a word, George lifted the damaged tire and carried it back into the shop's shadows. Now Keith and Dennis, they would both exchange like a look. It may have been silent, but it was full of meaning. See, they had questions, but something about the moment. They decided it was not either the time or the place to ask them. Now a little bit of time would go by and George would reappear holding the tire, patched and repaired, but different. See, it was lightly etched on the very surface of the tire with markings. We're talking about strange symbols that either Keith or Dennis would even recognize. Not scratches, not manufacturing labels, something else. Something deliberate. Was it a message, a warning, perhaps a test? Keith didn't know. And George, he never gave an explanation. He simply just handed the tire over and gave them one last look before venturing right back into the back room. They didn't confront him. They didn't ask about the symbols. They didn't press for answers because deep down, they already had one. See, this was no coincidence. Now, from that day forward, George never spoke to Keith again. Never bothered his family, never left a single footprint in the snow, and in some way, that was more unnerving than if he had. Had they unknowingly reached some type of unspoken truce? Or was there something bigger at play, something that Keith and Diane would never truly understand? Now, life had settled, somewhat. The strange tracks, the eerie encounters, the looming presence of George, it had all kind of faded into the background. But Keith Williams never quite let go of the unease, the feeling that something wasn't finished. And then one afternoon, Dennis showed up, his face almost unreadable. He refused to say a word until Keith climbed into the car. See, something about his tone, his silence, it made Keith's gut twist. At first, Keith thought maybe they were just going into town, maybe he was going to stop and get a coffee. But then, as they went further down the road, he knew that they weren't heading in that path. In fact, The roads they were going to seemed to lead to George's cabin. "Turn around," Keith told him. But Dennis would shake his head, and then he dropped the bombshell. George? He was dead. Keith demanded proof, and Dennis explained that his father had heard it on the police scanner, the reclusive man in the woods. Well, he was gone. Keith felt a very strange mix of emotions. Firstly, he had some relief. There was also some curiosity and a little bit of dread. If George was behind the bizarre tracks, if he was behind being the watcher in the windows, what did his death truly mean? Now, pulling into George's driveway, they saw a county deputy. He was already parked outside, and between the three of them, they would have a conversation back and forth, and they would come to an agreement that they could go inside. And as they went inside, Keith, he felt it. This entire place was completely wrong. I mean, there was nothing inside, no furniture, no dishes, no clothing. Every single cabinet was wide open, completely bare, like no one even really lived there at all. And then the deputy, he would motion for them to follow. He led them to a very small door in the back. And when it swung open, a wave of thick, musty air spilled out. It smelled like a damp, heavy, almost like it reeked of some sort of an animal. Now, inside, the walls were lined with iron plates. They were heavy and overlapping, bolted together, almost like a homemade bunker. But it wasn't the walls that sent the real chill down Keith's spine. There was 2 thick iron chains that was hanging from the ceilings. And those chains was leading to shackles. We're talking about large, thick shackles, not for a person, not for anything normal. And the walls, they were scratched. There was deep gouges in the iron, some of them that was rusted over with time, and others that they almost seemed like they were fresh. Keith and Dennis felt it. This wasn't storage. This was containment. The deputy admitted he had never seen anything even remotely close to any of this in all the years that he'd been on the force. I mean, here we had a cell, a cage, but for what? And who or what had put all the scratches on the walls, especially so deeply into the iron? Then they found something else extremely odd. It was a small jar. It was full of silver dollars. Keith didn't know what to make of it. Maybe it was a superstition, maybe a payment, almost like it was trying to ward off something. But it was the only thing that was left in this entire empty old house. As for George, his final resting place, it's an unmarked grave in London, Ohio. No name, there's no dates, no explanation for the horrors inside that creepy little cabin. And in the end, well, the man at the heart of the mystery took the secrets with him. All right, let's slow this down a little bit. Let's look at this from a more scientific and realistic perspective. You know, it's easy to get wound up into these stories about werewolves, especially when we talk about something that jumps from the top of the house and jumps for 20 feet away. It's always exciting to think that there's things that go bump in the night. But if we push the monster angle to the side, let's look at, first off, what could this be? Now, could an ordinary animal have caused the tracks or even that bizarre jump? Well, let's look at big canines first. We're talking about things like wolves and coyotes. They've been known to get up on their rear legs when they're trying to jump further, and significantly further than I think many of us would even realize. And let's not forget, the snow can sometimes distort footprints and make them look significantly larger than what they are. My size 11 can easily turn into a size 13 or 14 in the snow. But what about the leap? We're talking about a solid 20-foot gap. Now, many of us, myself included, that number is astonishing. I mean, there are some big cats. We're talking about like mountain lions that can spring incredible distances in a single bound. But we assume that if it's a cat, and it's making that far of a jump, which is extremely possible, why would it go bipedal and then walk into the woods? That part doesn't make sense. And you got to remember, when it comes to science, they want concrete proof. We're talking DNA evidence, plaster castings and footprints and trail cam footage, something that can be tested and confirmed. But when it comes to eyewitness accounts, while valuable, they only go so far. Now, historically, this isn't the first time that communities have claimed to see half-human, half-canine figures stalking the shadows. I mean, stories about the Dogman or werewolves, they go all the way back to European lore. Not to mention various indigenous legends about a shape-shifting being that walks between the different realms, half man, half beast. Now, a lot of times when we see these different stories, they just become that of folklore. And a lot of times the stories come from times when there's a lot of anxiety going on. Some would say this could be possibly like a mass hysteria, a fear of the unknown, things that go bump in the night. When it comes to science, it's easy to point a finger and say, you're just scared. That's what's causing all of this. Dismissing these sightings as pure folklore doesn't close the book. I mean, time and time again, we uncover new species or document animal behavior that we once thought was far-fetched. So while science is going to always lean towards healthy skepticism when it comes to shapeshifters, it also reminds us that the natural world, sometimes it loves to surprise us. Could a misidentified wild animal be the very root of Keith Williams' ordeal? Well, possibly. Could we be dealing with a more tangible phenomena that we just fully don't understand yet? Well, that's also possible. In the end, as much as we try to fit stories like this into a neat little box, there's always room for the unexplainable. Maybe one day we'll have evidence that nails down the truth, but until then, I'm simply reminded that the world, especially the dark, moonlit parts, they remain full of mysteries, some of which still defy our best attempts when it comes to trying to come up with an explanation. Okay, so we try to ground this in science and documented history, but let's face it, sometimes the normal explanations, they don't quite cover the strangeness of what people have experienced. And that brings us to some fringe theories, the ones that defy our usual way of thinking. Are they outrageous? Well, maybe. Fascinating? Absolutely. One idea that floats around is shape-shifting. Not just a legend, but as an actual rare phenomena. There are folks who believe that certain individuals, through whether it be a curse or a ritual or even like an inherited trait, they gain the ability to change form. Now, it sounds straight up like folklore, and yet stories of were-beings they come across from numerous cultures, and that's worldwide. Could a man truly possess the strength and agility of a wolf, leaping from rooftops with ease? And if so, what triggers the transformation? Another angle points to some sort of an undiscovered cryptid. Let's think about things like Bigfoot, but more canine. Now, in some corners of the cryptozoology community, there's a theory that there was like an evolution of some sort of a wolf or a canine that might walk on two legs under certain circumstances. I mean, sure, the mainstream science says, show me the body or definitive DNA evidence, but believers counter with plenty of species that thrive under the noses of oftentimes official discovery. Then there's the deep end stuff. Government experiments, for instance. A handful of you might recall rumors about secret labs producing hybrid creatures or genetically altered soldiers. Evidence? None. Well, none that's publicly verified. Still, these rumors, they refuse to die, especially in a rural area where the rumor mill churns out wild possibilities whenever the unexpected surfaces. Last but not least, the paranormal approach. Could Keith's encounter be linked to something almost interdimensional? Now, some claim that these werewolf-like sightings spike around locations that a lot of times they say there's like a thin boundary between worlds. Now, I can tell you, I've been to this location. I did a podcast about this very story on Deceptive Reality, which I co-host with a buddy of mine. His name's Nick. When I took my drone out there, there's like a marshland. And the interesting thing about the marshland is there was a very high electrical magnetic field in a place where there's no power lines. There's no reason for there to be a high EMF level, to the point to where even my drone was giving the indication and the warnings. So much so that I pulled it back. I was scared I was going to lose my drone. Look, I'm not saying that I buy these theories wholesale, but I do think that they're worth exploring, if only because they reflect how far and wide our imagination can stretch when logic fails to neatly resolve a mystery. And who knows, every so often, the wildest idea might end up pointing to a much closer truth than we ever realize. But tonight we've heard the story. Glowing eyes stalking us through the windows. The footprints that defy logic. The thing that crawled up the side of the house. Now there's the practical scientific angle. Misidentified wildlife, mass hysteria, or perhaps a person with motives that we never truly uncovered. Then there's the Fringe perspective. Shapeshifters, cryptids, or even the possibility of something far beyond our usual understanding. But which story is closest to the truth? Now, at the end of all this, all we're left with is really a puzzle that Keith Williams and his family will probably never be able to solve. There's also more questions that are now left in rural London, Ohio. And in the end, I have to wonder, was George a human that was possibly just living off the grid with more secrets that will never be unraveled? Or was it something more primal behind those towering leaps and bipedal footprints? Could the stories of werewolves and dogmen be rooted in a rare phenomena that maybe we just don't see in our day-to-day lives? Or do legends of half beast, half man persist simply because our minds crave an epic foe that's lurking under the moonlight? Now, no matter where you land on the spectrum, skeptic, believer, someone in the middle, if anything, this story, it serves as a reminder of how deeply the unexplainable scares us. Maybe that's what keeps the fascination alive. I mean, after all, the unknown is the greatest stage of our darkest fears and our wildest possibilities. So is the Williams family tale a glimpse into a hidden reality, or just another tall tale from London, Ohio? I'll leave that for you to decide. I'm Bert, and this has been Retraced Echoes. If you've enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the like button, and if you enjoyed this episode, tell me your thoughts in the comments down below. Until next time, stay curious, and remember, sometimes when the wind howls across the empty fields at night, it might just be the wind, but every so often, it could be something else altogether. Until I see you again, goodbye.